Okay, so today is a truly amazing day. It is the beginning of the 10th month. That means 10 months ago, actually a full 9 months, the Russians have been in Ukraine wreaking havoc. And it's only thanks to the efforts of this man here, Zelensky, that the Ukrainians have held together for 10 months. Nobody expected in that first few days that they were going to last even 10 days, let alone 10 months. So I'm really amazed that we're even here still at this point. I'm amazed because in the first few days I didn't think it would last, and I'm amazed that we're at 10 months and just seeing all the destruction that we've seen over this time. It's mind-numbing. The enemy has failed to find a way to break us and will not find one, Zelensky said, adding that the Ukrainian military was holding key lines in all directions. That's right. This guy is the leader. Like, you see a leader of this caliber once in a generation, maybe twice, and he's the guy. Another article, only the liberation of our land and reliable security guarantees for Ukraine can protect our people from Russian escalations. Every day we work with partners for this. There will be significant news soon. When he says there will be significant news soon, generally speaking, you hear significant news soon. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. In the meantime, we find out more evidence of Russian torture, particularly savage, in Kherson Oblast. This is from the Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. Again, a very reliable source. Yesterday, I talked about the Nobel Prize winner who was saying that essentially for the Russians, torture and war crimes, it's a feature, it's not a bug. Like, this is the way that they do war. And so prosecute now, just start prosecuting. Don't wait until the war has ended. And I think that's the right approach. Much of Ukraine is still without power after heat, and water after missile attacks. I promise you, this is a different article than the one I showed you yesterday, and the one I showed you the day before, and the one I showed you the day before that. This is just the reality of people on the ground. The Kiev mayor said that 60% of households in the 3 million people were without power. But what they're doing is they're working around it somehow, and and I'll show you that in these other articles. But in the meantime, the Russians are using this as a weapon of war. Millions are being plunged into extreme hardship and appalling conditions of life by these strikes. He said, taken as a whole, this raises serious problems under international humanitarian law, which requires a concrete and direct military advantage for each object attacked. Right, so attacking civilian infrastructure just to be terrorist. Now, that's why the EU Parliament called Russia a terrorist nation legally. They declared that Russia is a terrorist nation, and they're right to do so because of this. Now, what does this look like, and what are they doing about it? Well, Kiev has launched the work of more than 400 heating points throughout the city or the region. These points will work every day. Most of them are equipped in the schools and other social institutions of the city. If there's no electricity supply in your house for more than a day, you can come to the heating point to recharge your gadgets or flashlights, drink tea, find out information about where pump rooms are located, etc. So the Ukrainians have been incredibly creative about trying to work around things and trying to find advantage where there's only hardship, and they've done this. France is donating 100 generators, and I was wondering, like, how are they creating these points? Is there like underground lines or what? Well, this might be part of it. France is sending 100 powerful French generators to Ukraine to help the population survive the winter. So if you can use generators, that's one way of doing it. Lines buried underground, that might be another way, but it's a very difficult situation. In the meantime, Putin supporters are calling for the liquidation of Ukrainians as genocidal rhetoric swells. And I've seen this amp up and up over time. You heard it first with the initial, we got to get rid of the Nazis, and then it kind of died down. But over time, you see it from more quarters from Russians all over the place. Prominent supporters of Russian President Vladimir Putin are increasingly using genocidal rhetoric. Well-known commentators ranging from military bloggers to journalists to politicians and officials belonging to nationalist factions in Russian politics have repeatedly called for Russia to adopt a more merciless approach to Ukraine, with some promoting the use of nuclear weapons. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, he characterized officials within Kiev's government as cockroaches, called them grunting pigs earlier in November. He denied the mythical existence of Ukraine, saying that Ukraine's not actually a people group, it's just part of Russia. That's what they're saying. Telling his followers this week that Kiev is the capital of ancient Russia, and that Kiev is just a Russian city where people have always thought and spoke Russian. Okay, so they're trying to revisit history or revise history and say, no, it was never like this, it was always like that. And Ukraine is not actually its own place. That's part of the propaganda. That's one major plank in their propaganda. I've repeatedly said, by and large, that Ukraine nation does not exist. It's just a political orientation. Moscow City Duma deputy and pro-Kremlin journalist Andrei Medvedev, that's different than the other Medvedev I've just talked about, told his followers on Instagram. All this can be stopped only through the liquidation of Ukrainian statehood in its current form, Medvedev said. So that is maximalist ambitions to actually destroy all of Ukraine and bring it into Russia and become part of Russia proper. So that's what's actually going on in their thinking. Okay? NATO is sending, like the French are sending generators, NATO is sending jammers so that they can kind of like monkey with the wireless signal between who's sending the drones and where the drones are. And if they can do that, they can make the drones not be able to hit their targets. And I think that's absolutely awesome. I don't know what the technology is or how that works, but that is a great way of stopping them to the degree that they can do it. Okay, now it's time for some fun with Russian state media. First article, Zelensky continues to talk rubbish instead of peace. Okay, well, what did he say? If someone offers us a way that will help return Crimea by non-military means, I will only be up for it. If a possible solution does not provide for all the Russian military to leave the territory, then there's no need to waste time on this. So they're saying it's rubbish because he's talking about taking Crimea back. Crimea is part of Russia. How could he be talking about that? So, but if you're Ukraine right now, you're thinking, I can't leave you here on what was our territory. That's not going to work. Zelensky also spoke about possible negotiation with Russia. In his opinion, Russia will freeze the conflict. That's what they want to do. They want to declare peace to hold things in place. That was Henry Kissinger's idea. Just like go back to where before the war broke out, those same lines. That's not going to work. So essentially, from Zelensky's point of view, it's do or die. We're either going to take it or we're going to die trying. And I think that's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to take it. He's going to force Russia, eventually grind Russia down and force them to capitulate. Russia will freeze the conflict. It's a matter of time when the hostilities will resume if they can get that kind of peace deal. So the Kremlin says Ukraine wants no peace. Zelensky is not being realistic at all. Well, from their point of view, that's correct. But I don't think it's realistic to think that the Ukrainians can stop, like that they can do this and not expect that Russia is going to try to gobble up some more. Putin answers some questions about further mobilization in Russia. He's talking to some moms of young men in Russia. One woman at the meeting told the president that her other son was 17 years old. I'm horrified to think that when he turns 18, he will go to the fight soon, she told Putin. Now, the remarkable thing is that this was carried in Pravda, that was being carried in that way. But the president assessed the need to continue mobilization with one phrase: there's no need, that's enough for us. Now, it's not enough for them. They're going to need to come back to this later, or they're going to have to quietly and secretly mobilize, and they'll do it by finding the far-flung communities out in the sticks where people aren't really plugged into media as much, and where they're ethnic enclaves, and double down on those. That's what they're going to do over time, and that's what they've been doing so far. They've been looking at the Russians. I didn't know this before, but the Russians are actually really racist, and I'm not saying that lightly. I mean that in a true sense. And I have a colleague who studied in Russia who mentioned this to me as well. And the idea is like you're either Russian or you're one of these other multi-ethnicities within Russia, but those other multi-ethnicities within Russia are getting the short end of the stick in mobilization. And you can see this in many statistical views of what has actually transpired in Russia in mobilization. Okay, Ukrainian troops used as cannon fodder, says Putin. Now, very often what the Russians do, they charge their enemies with doing, whether it's the United States or whether it's Ukraine in this scenario. So listen to this, and then you'll hear what they're actually doing. The Russian President Vladimir Putin says his country is not fighting against the people of Ukraine, but instead facing down their leadership as outside forces who are using the country as a proxy. He claimed that Ukrainian soldiers are being used as cannon fodder. Well, actually, Russian soldiers are kind of being used as cannon fodder, being poorly trained and sent right into the fight by what he called the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev. Meanwhile, those who do not fall in line with orders are executed on the spot. I have heard zero accounts of that happening in Ukraine, but I've seen multiple accounts of that happening from the Russian side. Putin insisted, citing information supplied to him by primary sources. Our boys have seen this firsthand. The bodies of the executed are just left to lie there. Just recently, there was another case. 5 people were shot right in front of the lineup of those who refused to go or left their positions, the president said. But I haven't seen any accounts of this happening in Ukraine. Maybe it did, and maybe I'm just not aware, but I have not seen that. But I have seen accounts of this from being done on the Russian side of the equation. It's really maddening to see this in print. There is a completely different moral atmosphere in Kiev's forces. Well, that's true, but it's not true for the reason that you're saying here. Putin noted, adding that this is once again confirmed that we are dealing with a neo-Nazi regime without any exaggerations. Okay, so that's the kind of thing that the people of Russia are reading here in RT. Okay, last little bit, Meta added to extremist list. While we're talking about fascism, Meta is no longer, that's Facebook. Facebook is no longer allowed in Russia because they allowed aggressive rhetoric toward Russian citizens, as opposed to, say, bombing or sending missiles at kindergartens and hospitals and things along those lines. Okay, that's all that I have today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for caring about Ukraine.